Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Forgetting How to Forget and Remembering How to Remember. First of all, we'd like to thank you for being a regular listener, regular watcher, and we hope you are learning. We hope you have questions. We'll be happy to answer, and we also hope that you are having as rich an experience as we are having putting together this program. Thank you again. The most terrifying combination of words in the English language, in my view, is life goes on. Those words seem small, but they are heavy. They help you realize, they help you understand that whatever it is you think has happened to you, no matter how important, no matter how significant, no matter how disastrous, and no matter how sudden, life goes on. And it's not just about one person. Think about a family, think about a community, think about a city, a state, a country. Lives end, stories cease, and many clocks have just stopped. But the world just keeps moving on. In other words, life goes on. And if you think about it, if you don't remember some of these things, they'll be completely forgotten. So, for example, when a quiet, mostly rural town is abruptly visited by explosives, shooting, and killings in the space of a few hours, you get a mark that never truly fades. But if you choose not to remember it, or whether you even choose to remember it, life goes on. Today, on this podcast, we remember the Owo bank robbery on the 26th of March in 2015. On this fateful day, or on that fateful day, 50 armed gunmen, I repeat, 50 armed gunmen, stormed the city of Owo in Ondo State. They went there to steal, they went there to kill, they went there to destroy. And it has always been a dark day since then, but it was a dark day that came without warning. First of all, just to reel off a few facts, 7 policemen were killed. A woman who was a bystander was killed. 2 bankers were killed, and a number of bank security officials were also killed. The casualties on the part of the armed robbers, however, were 7 men. 7 of them were taken out by security operatives. And the police and other security agents were quick to respond. They got on the scene fast enough. They closed the exits. They did what they could do. And quite frankly, they did as good a job as they could. However, there is no hiding from the fact that what happened that day is such an event that you can say, controversially so, was above the pay grade of such a place. Again, we should reel out some of the facts so that before we get to the story. And the facts are there were 50 armed gunmen involved. They went to four banks primarily: Eco Bank, Wema Bank, First Bank, and Sky Bank. The money that was stolen was unconfirmed, but it was in excess of 20 million naira. As a matter of fact, of the items recovered were 9.3 million naira in cash, arms and ammunition, including 12,000 rounds of ammunition, 6 assault rifles, 17 AK rifles, 11 dynamites, 142 magazines, as well as police and military uniforms. Directly or indirectly, 50 people were killed in these attacks. At this point, it will make some sense to explain the place that we are talking about. Or, depending on who you ask, is a town or it's a city. It's a city because it has all that it takes to be a city. It has a private university called Achievers University on one end of it. It has a polytechnic, the Owo Poly, or Rugipo as we call it, Rufus Giwa Polytechnic. It has a medical center. It has tourist attractions like the Midas Hotel and Resorts. And basically, it has a good enough population to call it a city. As at the last count, Owo has at least 300,000 people. It also, I must say this, has one of the more recognizable tourist attractions in Nigeria, which is the Olowo of Owo's Palace, which is regarded by many to be the largest monarch's living quarters in Africa. It is a majestic sight to behold, and if you ever have the chance to, you should go visit. However, there's not really much in Owo, which is why I said, depending on who you ask, it's a town. In terms of landmarks, there's the palace, and the palace oversees two markets: Ojaoba, which is right in front of the palace gate, and Ojakoko, which is just across the road. Um, it has the Polytechnic on the expressway coming from Akure, and then it has the Ikare Junction, which is the place where you can see the road that goes straight to Ikare, and also the road that goes towards Jokes, Ipele, and then Benin City. Now back to this incident. This was a lot more than an armed robbery. This was a calculated attempt to instill terror, to bring pain, to bring suffering, and of course, I imagine, to get away with some things. And the effect on the town is still there to this day. The commercial activity, for example, was affected at first, as you can imagine. In the immediate aftermath, most of the banks closed down. In fact, at a particular point, every single bank in Owo closed down, and they remained closed for weeks after the incident. And in truth, this is my opinion, banking and commercial activity never really recovered. You know, right now, and this may have changed, of course, or it will change when you visit, and we hope you visit. There are a few banks in the city. One of them, of course, is Zenith Bank, which is in the premises of the Polytechnic. And then we still have some of these banks, First Bank and Access Bank, which are in the main city. But like we said, commercial activity just never really returned. And you can understand that when something like that has happened in such a place that is so small and so isolated, re-establishing trust with the security operatives, with the bankers, with everybody involved will be quite the task. But here are a couple of things that we should consider. First of all, for places like that, the use of non traditional means is very high. So, right now, a lot of people prefer to use bank wallets rather than to use actual banks. The likes of OPay and PalmPay and MoneyPoint are very popular. Very few people want to walk into a banking hall to use those services. And here's a more crucial point: the neighboring towns or the neighboring cities of Ikare and Akure have much more banking activity than Owo. However, they also have histories of this kind of event. Granted, not as serious, not as deadly, but as a matter of fact, just a month before this happened in Owo, something similar happened in Ikare, but it did not have the same pronounced effect. For people like me, when I hear about things like this, one of the first things I think of is how in the world did this happen? And now that it has happened, what are the questions that should be asked? Now, interestingly, some of these questions have been answered, but they have not been answered sufficiently enough for us not to ask again. And I will ask some here. First of all, there are three ways in and out of Owo. For those who know, hold on, I'll get there. But there are three ways in and out of Owo. The first is the Akure to Owo expressway. If you are going from Owo to Akure, you will pass a place called Emuri in the outskirts of Owo. You will get to a place called Ogbese, which is in the middle, and then you go forward and then you get to Akure. If you leave Owo and you are going to Ikare, you pass Oba, then you get to Akumba, and then you get to Ikare. Then if you are going to Benin, you go out to Ipele, you get to Ifon, and then you go forward and get to Benin. Those are the three roads that lead in and out of Owo. And these roads are heavily policed. As a matter of fact, off the top of my head, the expressway that goes from Akure to Owo has 6 permanent checkpoints that do not change. More may be added from time to time, but there are 6 checkpoints that do not change. 2 of them are manned by the Nigerian Army. This is to, I'm only saying this because I'm trying to explain why I would not buy, for example, that is the way through which they came. All 3 roads are heavily guarded. All 3 roads are heavily manned. And those are the ways to get into the town. For those of you who know and you are watching, I can imagine you are screaming at the top of your voice, there's one more, there's one more. Yes, you are right. There is one more. There is an undeveloped road which goes through Isewe, Araromi, up to Sanosi, and then Ute. And it goes all the way down to the boundary of Ondo and Edo, to the point where you would start to see over the horizon Okada in Edo State. The idea is if you go down this path long enough, you'll be standing at a point where to your left is Okada in Edo, and to your right is Egbeta in Ondo State. But why are these important? This is important because we shall consider one more thing and then marry these two facts together. We'll go back to the tools that were used for this robbery. Now, these robbers did not come on foot. They came in vans. They came in tow trucks and in vans. And when they came, as we mentioned, the items that were recovered from them, 12,000 rounds of ammunition. These are the ones that were not used because they were shooting sporadically. They threw grenades and they made certain places explode. So they used some of the ammunition and they got away with a lot of ammunition because they were only able to kill a few of them and apprehend another 7, I think. There were 50 men involved. So more than 30 men escaped. They had assault rifles. They had AK-47s. They had magazines with bullets in them. And so when you marry these two things together, the first question that comes to your mind is, why would people so resourceful and why would people with so much already be attacking a town and going after 4 banks? Obviously, they must have been tipped off. Obviously, there must have been maybe a cash transfer that they knew about, and so they were targeting. But then again, the reason I mentioned those 4 ways in and out of a war is surely they must have expected to escape. And as it turns out, they did escape through the fourth road because, like I said, that road is underdeveloped. The road is not tarred and it has been left undone for decades. Not many people use it when they travel. Only people who live in those communities that are along the road, who have no choice but to use the road, use the road. Most people will go around and use the trunk roads, which are federal roads. When you marry these two things together, you find that these people came with such sophisticated equipment and they had an escape route and they were able to do as much as they were able to do in such a short period of time. And the first thing that comes to your mind is surely there must have been some people in there that helped. Like they say, there's always an inside man. But whether or not we can answer that question will not change the fact that many people's lives were destroyed that day. There's a story about a man who had returned from the United States and had come to live his last years, and he was one of the casualties of that day because he was hit by a stray bullet. Now, this is one of the reasons that a story like this is so captivating. Like I said, or as a town or city, depending on who you ask, has 300,000 people, just over 300,000 people. You would imagine that when something like this happens, especially in the city center, there will be nobody who does not know about it, or who does not hear about it, or who is not told about the effects of it. You can imagine people going to the bank the next day and finding out that the bank is closed because there was a robbery. You can imagine people saying that every road that they use is manned by security operatives because the entire place is on high alert. People are free to go out past dark. People, the state enforcing a curfew, and basically life becoming abnormal. At this point, I should say, I've been to Owo. As a matter of fact, I've lived in Owo. It is, for want of a better word, a strange place. The people of Owo are like most Nigerians. They are nice, they are loving, they are interesting. However, Owo is not the most expressive place, especially for a western city. They do not have a lot of gatherings, they do not have a lot of activity. They are a very peaceful place. And for those of us who know the history of that place, you would understand that it is better for a place like Owo to be peaceful than for it to be rowdy. But when we say rowdy, this is not the kind of rowdy that we are talking about. Not an incident where people come, people steal, people kill, people destroy, and lives are cut short. That is a shame. It is a damn shame, and it is the most unfortunate sequence of events. Looking at some of the pictures that we come across, it is interesting when you see the kind of ammunition that these people were able to gather for themselves. When you see the guns, the rifles, when you see the bullets, and you realize that this was a most sophisticated operation that was carried out by people who knew exactly what they were doing, had the intelligence to do what they were doing, and quite frankly, have no remorse for what they did. Here is one of the banks which was on fire when it was attacked. If our research is correct, this bank explosives were set to it, and so it went up in flames, and people tried to help. That's one interesting thing that you come to learn about Nigerians is that despite what is going on, you are never wanting for people that will lend assistance. When there's a fire, there are always people who will be running with buckets of water from where you do not know to help you put out that fire, and sand and all sorts of things. It's one great thing that we have about the Nigerian spirit that we need to hold dear to ourselves. I told you about the Olowo of Owo's palace. It is one of the biggest, if not the biggest palace in Nigeria. It truly is a sight to behold. If you ever have the chance to visit Owo, you should actually visit the palace. You you would love it. Owo itself is positioned, quite frankly, in the middle of Ondo State, if you are being honest, because Owo is in the middle of Akure, which is on one border, and Ikare, which is on another border, and Owo is smack dab in the middle. If you look at it this way, you would come to understand that Owo, and when you think of the size of the place, is actually one of the main towns or one of the main cities that makes Ondo State what Ondo State is. In addition to banks being attacked, police stations were attacked too, and they did not. Of course, if you are going to do something like that, one of the first people that you want to not respond are the security operatives. So you would find a way to incapacitate them as well. But the response of the police was fantastic. Security operatives, they rushed in to save. They informed the people further down the road to make sure that they could not go. And I can imagine that the robbers knew this. Because they knew this, that is why they made sure that they used this undeveloped route, which could not be policed as such. Like I said, I had the privilege of being a resident in Owo for about 3 years. The culture, the life is much different from most places that you will go to. For example, the language is familiar enough that when you hear it, you know that they are speaking Yoruba. But it is strange enough that if you think because you understand Yoruba, you will understand it, you will get completely lost because it is different. The people are fiery. Like I said, if you know about the history of Owo as a place, you would understand why it is not a place that you play with. And in the last 3 decades, this is quite controversial, but we need to say this. There hasn't really been a part of Ondo State that has been more disturbed, more plagued, more troubled than this great city of Owo. As a matter of fact, on this podcast, we have about 3 different incidents that affected this great city that we want to talk about. They all include loss of life, they all include skill, which is unthinkable, and there are things that we are forgetting how to forget, and therefore we should remember. But here's the important thing. Right now, and still, there is life, There's laughing, there's playing, there's living. And I have said a number of times in this video, if you ever get the chance to visit, and especially for a short stay, you will not want for places to go to and have a good time. They have fantastic hospitality arrangements. They have places you can go and sightsee. Their sport is not bad. The Owo Township Stadium is a place to visit, or the Rufus Polytechnic Sports Center. And if you are just traveling from Lagos to Abuja or any shorter distance in between, or is one of the places that you pass through and you smile and see a bit of life, you wave and then you move on your way. There's life there, there's hope there. And as much as we remember this and remember the lives that were lost and remember the people that were lost, we pray and we hope that we do not have to go through episodes like this any longer. But this was our episode on the Owo bank robberies that occurred in 2015. Thank you very much for sharing with us.